Hello and welcome. In this video, I will show you how to create a widget that displays a list of items in a cart with their details and images. First, you need to create a cart screen class. Then inside the main screen and inside the bottom navigation bar, we use this function will push the filter screen to the navigation stack and display it on top of the main screen. Next, we will copying the app bar widget from the filter class that you created in the previous video and changing the actions property. We add a size box widget, which will create a fixed size box for the cart button. We set the height to 100 pixels and the width to 60 pixels, which will be the size of the box. The child of the size box widget is an icon button widget, which will display a button with a cart icon. We set the onPressed property to an empty function, which means nothing will happen when the button is pressed. We set the icon property to a container widget, which will contain the icon that you want to use for the button. We add some padding around the icon to create some space between the icon and the app bar. We decorate the container with a circular shape and a white color to create a contrast with the icon and the app bar. We also add a box shadow property, which will create a shadow effect around the container. We set the blur radius to 9 pixels, which will control how much the shadow is blurred. We set the offset to offset 00, which will control the position of the shadow relative to the container. Set the color to gray, which will be the color of the shadow. The child of the container is a SVG picture widget. We specify the asset name of the icon, which is stored in the Assets Icons folder. We set the height of the icon to 30 pixels, which will scale the icon proportionally. Next, we will create a widget that displays a list of items in a cart with their details and images. In body, we use a single child scroll view widget to enable scrolling for the content of the screen, especially when the keyboard is displayed or the screen size is small. The child of the single child scroll view widget is a padding widget which will add some space around the content of the screen, which will create some horizontal space on the left and right sides of the screen. The child of the padding widget is a column widget, which will display the content of the screen in a vertical direction. We set the cross-axis alignment property to cross-axis alignment start, which will align the content of the column to the start of the horizontal axis. We set the children property to a list of widgets that will be the content of the column. We add a sized box widget, which will create some vertical space between the app bar and the title of the screen. We add a text widget which will display the title of the screen as My Cart, with a large and bold font style. We add another size box widget, which will create some vertical space between the title and the list. We add a list view builder widget, which will create a scrollable list of items from a list of data. We set the physics property to never scrollable scroll physics, which will disable the scrolling of the list view and let the single child scroll view handle the scrolling of the screen. We set the shrink wrap property to true, which will make the list view only occupy the space that it needs and avoid overflow errors. We set the item count property to the length of the demo cart list, which is a variable that stores a list of cart objects that represent the items in the cart. We set the item builder property to a function that takes the context and the index as parameters and returns a widget for each item in the list. We return a cart card method. We pass the index and the item at the index position of the demo cart list as arguments to the cart card method. Now we create a cart card method. We define the cart card widget as a function that takes two parameters, an integer index and a cart object. The index represents the position of the item in the list of items, and the cart object contains the information of the item such as the title, price, image, description, and category. We return a stack widget, which will allow us to overlap multiple widgets on top of each other. We set the children property to a list of widgets that will be the content of the stack. We add a container widget, which will display a black background with a delete icon on the right side of the card. We set the height to 129 pixels, which will be the height of the container. We decorate the container with a box decoration, which will allow you to customize the appearance of the container. We set the color to black, which will be the background color of the container. We set the border radius to border radius .circular 20, which will create rounded corners for the container with a radius of 20 pixels. We set the margin to edge insets .symmetric vertical 10, which will create some vertical space above and below the container. We set the padding to edge insets only right 16. We set the alignment to alignment center right, which will position the child of the container to the center right of the container. We set the child to an icon widget, which will display a delete icon with a white color. We add a dismissible widget, which will allow you to swipe the card to remove it from the list of items. We set the key property to a unique key, which will generate a unique identifier for the widget. We set the direction property to dismiss direction end to start, which will limit the swipe direction to only from right to left. We set the onDismissed property to a function that takes a direction parameter and removes the item from the list of items. We use the setState function to update the state of the widget and trigger a rebuild. We use the removeAt method to remove the item at the index position of the demo cart list. We set the child property to a sized box widget, which will create a fixed size box for the card. We set the height to 130 pixels, which will be the height of the box. The child of the sized box widget is a card widget, which will display a card with a white background and a shadow effect. We set the margin to edge insets all 0, which means the card will have no margin around it. We set the elevation to 15, which will control the depth of the shadow effect. We set the color to white, which will be the background color of the card. We set the shadow color to colors.gray with opacity 0.3, which will be the color of the shadow effect with a 30% opacity. We set the surface tint color to white, which will change the color of the card to white. We set the shape property to rounded rectangle border, which will define the shape of the card as a rectangle with rounded corners. The child of the card widget is a padding widget, which will add some space around the content of the card. The child of the padding widget is a row widget, which will display the content of the card in a horizontal direction. We add a container widget, which will display the image of the item in the card. We set the height to 100 pixels and the width 100 pixels. We decorate the container with a box decoration. We set the border radius to border radius, circular 20. The child of the container is a clip rect widget, which will clip the child of the container to the shape of the container. We set the border radius to border radius dot circular 20. The child of the clip rect widget is an image widget. We use the image property of the cart object to get the asset name of the image. We set the fit property to boxFit.fill, which will make the image fill the entire space of the container. We add a sizebox widget, which will create some horizontal space between the image and the details of the item. We add an expanded widget, which will make the column of the details of the item take up the remaining space of the row. The child of the expanded widget is a column widget. We set the cross-axis alignment property to cross-axis alignment.start. We add a fitted box widget, which will scale the text of the title of the item to fit the available space. The child of the fitted box widget is a text widget, which will display the title of the item with a large and bold font style and a black color. We use the title property of the cart object to get the title of the item. We add another fitted box widget. The child of the fitted box widget is a text widget, which will display the description of the item with a small and bold font style and a gray color. We add an expanded widget, which will create an empty space between the description and the price of the item. We add a row widget. We set the main axis alignment property to main axis alignment space between, which will create equal space between the price and the quantity of the item. In children, we add a text widget, which will display the price of the item with a $sign, a large and bold font style, and a black color. We add a container widget, which will display the quantity of the item and two buttons to increase or decrease the quantity. In box decoration, we set the color to colors.gray, shade 300, which will be a light gray color for the background of the container. We set the border radius to border radius.circular 20. The child of the container is a row widget. In children, we add an icon button widget, which will display a button with a minus icon. We add another icon button widget, which will display a button with a plus icon. Finally, we create a widget that displays a bottom navigation bar with the total price of the items in the cart and a button to proceed to checkout. We use a padding widget to add some space around the bottom navigation bar. The child of the padding widget is a wrap widget, which will wrap the content of the bottom navigation bar to the next line if there is not enough space. In children, we add a row widget. We set the main axis alignment property to main axis alignment dot space between, which will create equal space between the text widgets that show the total price. We add a text widget with a gray color and a medium and bold font style. We use the demo cart length property to get the number of items in the cart and interpolate it with the text. We add another text widget with a black color and a large and bold font style. We use the sum total function to get the sum of the prices of the items in the cart and interpolate it with a dollar sign. We define the sum total function, which will calculate the sum of the prices of the items in the cart and return it as a double value. We initialize a double variable called total and assign it to 0, which will store the sum of the prices of the items in the cart. We use a for loop to iterate over each item in the demo cart list, which is a variable that stores a list of cart objects that represent the items in the cart. We use the double.parse method to convert the price property of the cart item object, which is a string, to a double value and assign it to a double variable called item price. We add the item price to the total and assign the result back to the total, which will update the sum of the prices of the items in the cart. We return the total value, which is the sum of the prices of the items in the cart. Next, we add a sized box widget, which will create some vertical space between the total price and the checkout button. We add a container widget, which will display the checkout button with a black background and a white arrow icon. We set the left, top, bottom, and right padding to different values of duffel padding, which will create some space around the content of the container. In box decoration, we set the border radius to border radius, circular 16, and color to black. The child of the container is a row widget, which will display the text "Proceed to checkout" and the arrow icon in a horizontal direction. We add an expanded widget, which will make the text take up the remaining space of the row. The child of the expanded widget is a text widget, which will display the text "Proceed to checkout" with a white color and a large and bold font style. We add an icon button widget, which will display a button with an arrow icon. We set the icon property to a container widget, which will contain the icon that us want to use for the button. We set the height to 50 pixels. We add some padding around the icon to create some space between the icon and the container. In box decoration, we set the border radius to border radius.circular 16 and color to white. The child of the container is a SVG picture widget. We specify the asset name of the icon, which is stored in the assets icons folder, the color of the icon to black. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned something new. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching and see you next time.